From the corners to the steeples.
Okay.
Hear a testimony. Listen.
Listen.
Yeah. I grew up where the winners bite and mercy's hard to find.
Welcome back to the Greg Schreffler Show, where we talk about anything and everything that has the Almighty God in it. Why? Because we gotta, man. Dude, why aren't you talking about it? Anyway, so as you know, we're doing a continuing study on faith. And to be honest with you, even though this is episode 33, it's kind of like part 2 of episode 32. And that's kind of how that is how it's outlined in my notes. So anyway, so we're continuing our discussion in the faith series because we're going to still talk a little bit more about the mustard seed business. Hope you like the intro music. It's called Way, Truth, and Life by Misselle, Misselle. I think that's how it's pronounced, at pixabay.com. Let's get it on. This is episode 33 of the Greg Schreffler Show, and the mustard seed faith talk continues. And we're going to start off by saying little faith is not no faith. So one of the most misunderstood phrases Jesus used is little faith, air quotes. So some of the scriptures we're going to do are going to be familiar. Just sort of a quick review or to rejar your memory. Matthew chapter 28, verse 26 from the ESV, English Standard Version. And he said to them, "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" So let's notice what Jesus does not say. He doesn't say, "You have no faith." He just says, "You have little faith." Why do you think that matters? Or does it matter? So let's look at a couple examples. The first one we'll call storm number 1. And here we see that fear exposes faith's placement. So Matthew 8:23 through 27, Matthew chapter 8, verse 23 through 27, Jesus and the disciples are crossing the Sea of Galilee. A violent storm hits. And what's curious and that's often overlooked is that we have seasoned fishermen panic. Have you thought about that before? Verse 26. "Why are you afraid, O you of little faith?" So the storm didn't reveal a lack of belief in God. It revealed where their trust relocated under pressure. So I think this happens to us a lot, but we don't perhaps consider the process like I'm spelling it out here. Our faith relocates under pressure. Fear didn't remove faith, it redirected it. Let's look at storm number 2, walking on water, which is covered in Matthew 14:28 through 31. Remember, Peter walks on water, something no human has ever done since. Then he sees the wind and the waves, and he sinks, or starts to sink. Verse 31. "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" So this, I think, raises an important question. Peter had enough faith to step out of the boat because he did it. So what changed? Let's look at do our little Greek word study here at the word doubt. The word is translated doubt in the Greek. Distazo. I think that's how it's pronounced. But it means to waver, to hesitate between two positions. Now, when we hear the word doubt, we just understand doubt, but maybe we don't always really understand the exact definition of doubt. And I know that it can have additional meaning here, but it's interesting to point out that for the Greek, it means to hesitate between two positions, to be divided. So doubt is not unbelief, it's divided allegiance. Have we thought about it from that angle before? Peter's faith didn't vanish, it became split between Jesus and the circumstances. Haven't we done that? I know I've done that, but I've never considered this definition of it. Now let's look at another displacement of our faith, or the disciples' faith, under the scarcity test, we'll call it, when the feeding of the multitudes. chapter 14 of the book of Matthew, verses 15 through 17. We have only 5 loaves here and 2 fish. And this is despite seeing miracles. The disciples default to limitation thinking. Matthew 16, verses 9 through 10. Do you still not understand? Do you not remember the 5 loaves of the 5,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? Or the 7 loaves for the 4,000 and how many basketfuls you gathered? Ouch. But it's true. So this happens after Jesus has already fed thousands twice. So the observation here is that experience does not guarantee trust. Faith must be renewed in every situation. Let's see what a scholar has to say. Chuck Missler observed that Jesus' rebukes often follow miracles, not precede them. He says, miracles don't produce faith. Faith produces obedience, which positions people to witness miracles. Jesus is not disappointed in ignorance. He is confronting misplaced reliance. What's the difference between faith and unbelief? Mark 9:24. Remember this guy? I do believe, but help me overcome my unbelief. The dad. And I even said that that's kind of where I'm at and where I'm struggling. But now look at this. This is piercing. It was for me. This man has faith and unbelief at the same time. So unbelief here is apostia. It is not doubt. It is refusal to trust. So doubt causes us to hesitate, but unbelief resists. Jesus responds to doubt and he confronts unbelief. Let's look at a non-con. Sirach from Ecclesiasticus, chapter 2, verses 1 through 6. My son, if you come to serve the Lord, prepare yourself for testing. Faithfulness equals standing firm in covenant. Loyalty, testing reveals allegiance. Faith is framed as standing firm and not necessarily being certain about something. So this fits perfectly with Jesus' rebukes. He is not demanding certainty. He is demanding loyalty under pressure. I hope this is getting across. I feel like I'm struggling here. So what's the pattern here? Well, the violent storm for, remember, seasoned fishermen led to fear and scarcity, feeding of the many, led to calculating how much it would cost to feed all of them. And danger led to hesitation. So each time, Jesus says the same thing. Oh, you have little faith. Not because faith is absent, but because faith keeps being displaced. And that brings us back to the mustard seed. Faith doesn't fail because it's small. It fails because it's relocated. A mustard seed works because it stays planted. All right, next. No faith. The mustard seed, scale, silence, and the faith we don't see. So by the time Jesus mentions the mustard seed, he has already rebuked fear, corrected dependence on bread and numbers. He's exposed divided allegiance. He's tested his disciples repeatedly, so when he says faith like a mustard seed, this is not a motivational saying. It's a diagnosis. I think it's interesting to note that Jesus chooses the smallest possible comparison. Again, Matthew 17:20. If you have faith as a mustard seed. Now, why didn't he choose a pebble or a coin or even a grain of sand? But he chooses a seed. Something alive, invisible when planted, and unimpressive at the start. Now, to modern ears, that sounds poetic, but to first century ears, it sounded pointed. Now, what a seed assumes that Jesus doesn't say out loud. A seed assumes several things Jesus never verbalizes, but his audience would understand instantly. A seed must be planted. It must be released from the hand. It must be buried. It must be tested. so that it can grow in strength. Jesus isn't talking about size, he's talking about posture. A faith that moves mountains is surrendered, unseen, dependent, patient, alive. This is not how modern faith is usually framed. The growth problem. Why knowledge chokes faith. Matthew 13:31 through 32. The kingdom of heaven is like a grain of mustard seed. When it is grown, it is larger than all garden plants. The seed contains everything it needs for growth, but growth after planting, not before. And this is where many of us get hung up in our faith. We want explanations before trust. We want certainty before obedience. We want clarity before surrender. But faith, biblical faith, does not grow through accumulation. It grows through release. Letting go of fears. It grows through trust, vulnerability. It grows through surrender, relinquishing control. Jesus never says, if you understand enough, mountains will move. He says, if you trust enough to let go, even barely, God acts. Let's look at why small faith works. Chuck Missler pointed out that seeds are dangerous things. A seed is a small package of unstoppable intent. Once planted, it will do what it was designed to do, regardless of the planter's continued involvement. I know we can get technical here, but let's stay focused. But anyway, that aligns perfectly with Jesus' metaphor. Faith is not powerful because it's large. Faith is powerful because it's alive and placed correctly. Why do you think Jesus keeps faith microscopic? Here's the uncomfortable implication that Jesus never spells out. If faith, too small to see when planted, can move mountains, then the problem is not that our faith is small. The problem is that our faith is unplanted, is held back, hedged with conditions, replaced with explanation. A mustard seed in the hand does nothing. A mustard seed in the ground changes the landscape. First century faith versus modern faith. So first century people believed touching a robe could heal. Mark 5:27-28. Words carried authority. Matthew 8:8. Proximity mattered. Acts 5:15. They did not demand full understanding. They trusted power in relationship. Modern believers say, I need to understand first. It needs context. Let me research that. Those are not wrong, but they are often substitutes for trust. And we've discussed previously in episodes on infirmity and deception, knowledge can quietly replace dependence, and faith shrivels when it no longer needs God. And let's look at this mountains business, what Jesus is actually saying, or what's he talking about. So Isaiah chapter 2, verse 2. In the last days, the mountain of the house of the Lord will be established as the chief of the mountains. It will be raised above the hills, and all nations will stream to it. So here, mountains represent kingdoms, authorities, obstacles, spiritual opposition. So Jesus is not promising terrain alteration. He's describing kingdom displacement. Faith, even microscopic faith, aligned with God's authority, disrupts entrenched powers. That is why Jesus uses mountain language here. And his audience would hear spiritual authority, not fantasy. Let's look at why Jesus ends here. After all the tests, after all the rebukes, after all the failures, Jesus doesn't demand more faith. He says even the smallest, most real faith is enough. It's both comforting and convicting. Comforting because faith does not need to be impressive. convicting because excuses evaporate. And it demonstrates that our current faith is pathetic. Faith is not measured by size, it's measured by placement. A mustard seed works because it is alive, surrendered, planted, trusted. Next, let's look at union faith. Faith under grace. Why efforts fail and union works. So up to this point, Jesus has exposed something uncomfortable but unavoidable. The problem has never been the size of faith. The problem has been the framework in which faith operates. And that framework changes dramatically with him. Let's look at why faith behaves differently under grace as opposed to under the law. So under the law, faith functioned largely as trust expressed through obedience. For example, Deuteronomy 6:5. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. Faith was demonstrated by obedience, sacrifice, covenant, loyalty. But obedience did not empower righteousness. It expressed it imperfectly. Let's look at what Jesus says in contrast to that in John chapter 15, verses 4 through 5. Abide in me, and I in you. Apart from me, you can do nothing. This is not a law language. This is a union language. Faith under grace is not about striving to please God. It's about remaining connected to the source of life. Now let's look at why faith replaces effort so easily. Effort feels safer than trust. Effort gives us control, metrics, feedback, self-assurance. That faith requires release, dependence, patience, vulnerability. Romans 4, verses 4 through 5. When people work, their wages are not a gift, but something they have earned. But people are counted as righteous not because of their work, but because of their faith. So here we see Paul draws this clean line that effort seeks wages, Romans 4:4, and faith receives grace, Romans 4:5. And that distinction explains why the disciples keep failing. They keep trying to operate kingdom authority through human strength. And Jesus never trains the disciples to increase their faith. He never says for them to do that. And it's subtle, but crucial. Jesus never gives exercises to grow faith. He never says, practice believing harder, visualize better, increase your level of faith. Instead, he says, follow me, Matthew 4:19. Abide in me, John 15:4. Remain in my word, John 8:31. Faith grows indirectly as a byproduct of proximity, obedience, and trust. Let's look at Hebrews 12, verse 2. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. Jesus does not respond to faith. He produces it. Let's look at a scholar insight of why grace offends human instincts. Michael Heiser once noted that grace is disruptive precisely because it removes leverage. He says, grace offends our sense of fairness because it removes control. Faith under grace requires surrender, not performance. And this helps explain why the disciples repeatedly default to effort, rowing harder, calculating how much it's going to cost to feed all these people, arguing about who's the greatest. Faith under grace requires yielding, not pushing. One more time, let's revisit the mustard seed. A seed does not strive, does not assist its own growth, does not measure progress, does not understand outcomes. It simply remains planted. 1 Corinthians 3:6-7. I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the increase. Faith under grace accepts a humbling truth. Growth is God's responsibility. Placement is ours. Jesus' mustard seed teaching quietly removes every justification we cling to. Faith is not power you wield. Faith is a posture you adopt. Small, real faith, placed rightly, moves what large, performative faith could never move. All right, in closing, I'll say this. As you listen to the rest of Way, Truth, and Life by Mazel at pixabay.com, Old Testament faith reaches forward towards a promise. New Testament faith resets inwardly in a person. Jesus does not ask for great faith. He asks for real faith, even if it's small enough to lose between your fingers. All right, we'll stop here, and our faith discussion is to be continued. So, thanks for listening. Thanks for hanging out with me. Don't forget to leave a review. Tell me what's going on with you. Invite your family, friends, enemies, etc., to tune into the show. Get them to subscribe. And until next time, start doing some faith push-ups. See you. This program is the intellectual property of the Greg Schroeffer Show. Copyright 2026. All rights reserved. Unauthorized use, reproduction, or distribution without written permission is prohibited.